Whoa! We're live. We're live with our NPD talk. Here we go again. Hopefully you guys can hear me, and if you can't hear me, hopefully I can fix it, unlike earlier this week. So I would really like to get started out of the gate just kicking butt. Oh, whoops. My TikTok didn't go live right away, but here we are live. TikTok is great for some stuff, but maybe not so good for other things. It's great because the people come on and they talk. But what we want to go over here is kind of interesting because I'm going to tell you right now, this is one of those things where we're going to make this a series, and it goes into a lot of the content that I've already created. And this is about narcissists and how they became this way, and narcissists and borderlines. Now, to put things in perspective, we just wrapped up a 3-hour call for my groups. My groups are awesome. Please check them out and join them. If you're watching this on YouTube, there are links in the bio for all of that. And then I'm also going to try and do this to frame me a little bit better. Damn, man. I gotta have more look room for the slides and the edits that we do with this amazing work. So without further ado, guys, so check this out. If you're on my email list for high conflict custody, we're gonna change that to not only will you get the 30 and 30, but we're gonna also have a lesson integrated on narcissistic abuse in there. And also how to win custody in those situations. And we're probably going to make it unisex because after doing these live streams, I've had a ton of women talk to me about the different situations. Now, also in that, we're going to have it so that you can attend the Zoom calls. So right now, let me just make sure the email got sent out or it's scheduled to be sent out. There's a Zoom link that will be introduced to this call where you can call in and talk and all that sort of stuff, right? So we can ask questions. Now, we're going to have calls where we have basically people live Q&A. So if you're watching this on TikTok, you may not be able to interact with me. On YouTube, you may not be able to directly interact with me. What we're going to start doing is making that for people who are just for free on my email list. We're going to do that probably 2 to 3 times a month. And more than likely, we're going to have guests on so you could talk to attorneys, talk to social workers or whatever, dads who've won, different people who've had similar stories as you. And you can see the reality of all these different things going on. So I'm still hydrating. And actually, I made this tea before, when I was on my 3-hour call, and it's kind of cold. Hot stuff is good when we're talking. But let's dive into this. And if you wanted to be on the Zoom call in about 45 minutes, there will be an email that goes out to share the Zoom link that's happening right now. In fact, here's the Zoom call, TikTok guys, there I am, that you could join and we could talk and interact. But if you're not on the email list, then forget about it. And last time it was awesome, man. We had so many good people on here and so on. Oh, and let me just, hold on. Let me make sure that email is queued up to go out because there's so many moving parts here. And then we'll get started on the presentation. But it'll be a good one. Take some notes. And if you want to rewatch it, you can rewatch it on the YouTube live stream. And after about a day or so, I'll cut out all this part where I'm talking about all this stuff. Okay, so live stream is here. Let's look under scheduled. Let's make sure that the Zoom link is live in this email. And it looks like it is. Okay, cool. So yeah, in about 45 minutes, less than 45 minutes actually, we're going to email out the info to come in and call with Q&As. And normally in the Q&As, we're just going to have a straight Q&A for the night. There won't be any presentation. But now as I'm multitasking, that's going to go. Okay. I have not rehearsed this presentation I'm going to give, but I'm going to tell you right now, this week, we're going to give multiple presentations that deal with this exact subject and go a little bit deeper with it. So in this one, we want to talk about the origins of narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. So two personality disorders that wreak havoc in our custody battles, our divorces, and in our relationships. And we want to look at where this came from to truly understand it, because in my work, what we're normally trying to do, we're attempting to win a custody battle in this, okay? So in going over this material tonight, this is geared so that we can understand it, so that we can win in court. This is really, really important, okay? So let's get to this. What we're going to be covering tonight is understanding the origins of things like narcissistic personality disorder, as well as borderline personality disorder. And the intent of this is so that we can defend ourselves in a custody battle. We could argue something in court, and we could protect ourselves in breakups. This isn't here to objectify, diminish, or hurt somebody who has NPD or borderline who's attacking us. It's so that we can understand it and properly protect ourselves. Now, this is interesting because so much of the information that's out there on this is good information, but it's seen as something that objectifies them as, the narcissist and that sort of thing. And we're probably going to use that terminology quite a bit tonight, but I do want to point out that what we're trying to do here is we're trying to actually look at, how does this work? Where did this start? How did this originate? And if we can understand how this all originated, we can start to understand how to properly defend ourselves, right? And probably right now you're going down this rabbit hole of what is NPD, how are these things formulated, and so on. And why is this happening? And we're going, man, this demon and all this sort of stuff. So this week, we're going to be covering a lot on this. We're not just going to be talking about NPD and BPD this week. We're going to go deeper into other personality disorders that you might not be able to understand, or they're not on the wavelength, but they're very relevant, especially if you're going through a custody battle in this, and you're just being hammered and attacked by it, okay? So we're going to try and unravel our best how this all started, okay? So the goal isn't just to humanize narcissistic and borderline behavior so that we can forgive it. We're trying to understand how it came about so we can learn how to protect ourselves from it, prevent it so that we can not have these relationships again, but also if there's a legal road to protect ourselves, how we can isolate that and really look at it. Because if this is something, if there's a way to make a narcissist or a borderline stop, we want to do that as quick as possible, legally and through the courts and through this process. So in my groups, that does happen, okay? So what we want to also look at is we want to look at the origins of this via gender and via culture. This is really important. So we're actually going to look at the difference between male and female narcissistic abuse and how it started, how it manifests, and how the culture leads that. And we're not in a big blame game here. Again, this isn't so we can go, oh my God, the culture or these people or this is happening and it's hysteria. We're going to look at it tactically, so how we can start to defeat it, right? So we can protect ourselves, stop it in the right ways. We're also going to do a little bit, but there's going to be more this week, on the subclinical sides of these disorders, like personality disorders. So there's people that might be on the lower end of, let's say, the spectrum of NPD and so on. Now, I just want to say this. In this, we're going to talk about a lot of things that are relevant to custody cases, and we're going to talk about a lot of things that are relevant to what's very popular in society today about psychology and therapy. None of this replaces getting proper legal advice. This is not legal advice. You need to get counsel on that. You need to study things. If you hear something in here, you need to understand that it needs to be double, triple checked, and that this may have worked coming from my experience with my groups, who has the longest running support group for men that helps them out with their custody cases. This is our experience in it. it might not work for you. And I can tell you right now, everybody's case is so different, and what was working in the courts just 6 months ago may not work for you. So you have to be able to take that and do your due diligence around this. Also, therapeutically, you need to understand that if you've been attacked or abused by somebody with a personality disorder, more than likely you need some help, some specific help from a mental health professional. So this isn't meant to excuse that. And I get that you might not be able to afford it. You're looking at all your options. Maybe that's why you're exploring this video, but you need to start seeking out stuff where you can individually work with somebody about your unique case and what's going on. Diagnosing it yourself is not a diagnosis. And a misdiagnosis, which most likely you could do, or if you diagnose with the aid of somebody that you're just watching on YouTube, they don't know the person or what the situation is, you can end up into some really dangerous spots. It's severe, like it's a new problem, and I think in some ways it's a greater problem than what we started out with just a mental health issue, right? So when you misdiagnose or get misleading information, it goes in the wrong way. So please use this as a tool to look further legally, get the right professional help you can, and therapeutic help as well. Okay, super important with that. So let's go to this. You've been with somebody who's perhaps explosive, seductive, power hungry, manipulative. They've gaslit you. And maybe just right now, you're realizing how much of a lie it is. Okay, so they nearly destroyed you. In fact, maybe you feel that you are destroyed and you don't know how you're hanging on. But what I want to tell you here is that this didn't start out evil. And this is important to understand with different personality disorders and so on, is that they are made that way. So this is unique when it comes down to things like NPD, borderline personality disorder. There are theories about this, and we don't know a ton, and the psychological community isn't certain about all of this, but there is a lot about NPD, BPD that is this huge gray area of what it actually is. In fact, what we're going to talk about a lot this week are some of the other types of personality disorders that can move within that, right? So what we do then is we demonize, we label people as narcissists, we demonize it, we label borderlines, we say they're toxic people, and we move into this kind of cancel culture idea about narcissists and borderlines, to where this is a good excuse because we understand now that they're narcissists, that they can be thrown away. Okay. And what we want to do is we want to give a little bit of an explanation on what somebody with NPD or BPD is like without being too clinical, because ultimately, therapeutically and legally, and this is really important, and especially actually for both, I wanted to single out legally, but for both therapeutically and legally, you have to determine what your situation is with them, your specific situation. Okay. So what's so important is the patterns that you have in your relationship, is what their cadence and sequence is, the way they abused, or what you're setting up legally. You're trying to establish something unique to you and them. And this is really important. The more we make it a generalized diagnosis of what NPD is or BPD or one of the other things, if it's Munchausen's or something like this, and we stick to that label too much, we get away from finding out what the pattern is. And that pattern is going to unravel a lot for you on the therapeutic process as well as the legal process. Okay. So when we label at first, it's to give us a home base to understand what this ecosystem could be and for us to explore those different things. All right. So what we're going to look at here is what we're going to talk about our childhood roots. We're going to talk about different gender traumas. Okay. So how does this uniquely manifest for men, uniquely manifest for women? And this is important because especially in court, therapeutically too. But if we are a man and we're abused by a female narcissist, therapeutically, our path is going to be very different than a woman who's being attacked by a male narcissist. Okay. And vice versa in court, or the same in court. If we're a man being attacked by a female narcissist, they're going to go for different things. We're going to have to protect ourselves in different ways as men. And if you're a woman being attacked by a man, same thing. It's going to be a unique path of how those things manifest. Okay. So they weren't born this way. This was built. Now, in the research that's done, and again, these are things that are works in progress, right? There's assumed to be genetic factors. Okay. So there's high impulsivity, reactivity, all these different things, right? But there's also usually emotional neglect. And this is for both genders, both men and women. There's inconsistent attachment. So when we get to things like attachment theory, there's some broken attachment within there. There's oftentimes, and this is something that isn't talked about much, and I'm sad this is in my notes and I didn't review it well enough because YouTube might have a problem with it, but there's enmeshment of emotional incest and often abuse that could be in with this. So this could be that when we have certain emotional traumas, there's movements that manifest themselves, or there's something that will manifest themselves into what we would call NPD or BPD. Okay. There's tons and tons of survival via performance. So this is what we call charm, control, survival skills that deal with inconsistent parenting or inconsistent situations, different things where a child has to improvise to get attention, survive, get the love they need, natural urges and draws that oftentimes get rewarded in our culture, right? So this could be like charm, personality, charisma, being able to get attention right away, being able to get out of trouble, being able to lie on the spot. Now, if a child's in an environment where they have to do that more and they figure out how to do that, even though those could be bad things as an adult, that was a good thing as a child. That was a survival skill. Okay. So there could be false information. So they had to become someone else to survive. So not only are they lied to perhaps by adults or in school or different ways to compete, or they could even misperceive a cultural role to play, or they could be lied to about a certain way to be in culture. And so they start compartmentalizing who they have to be. You could have different identities that work for different people. So if dad is yelling, or if their stepdad or mom is yelling or something like that, they start to behave in a completely different way than they did at school. And with certain friends, they behave in another way and it feels good. These are all things that can happen. So borderlines oftentimes can have huge chaos inside. They can have collapses of identity. Oftentimes changing their name could be a thing, or they could have lots of, let's say, stuffed animals or imaginary friends or these things as children. And this is all to help maintain certain forms of identity or secureness in that. It doesn't always mean that. We're going to get to this here in a second. But a narcissist could be hollow inside and perform outside. So they could be insecure about something, but they could be performing and doing very well on the outside. So they could look good while having real problems inside. Now, when we think about all this stuff, right? So if we just went through this, like, okay, so there's some emotional neglect. All human beings can relate with this, right? There's always going to be some of that. Okay, there's an inconsistency of attachment, right? So there could be different broken attachments that they have. We all have that. There could be some emotional incest. So this is where you're seeing that love is something conditional and you're working towards it. And there's this back and forth of roles that are accepted with each other. These could be normal things within our society and culture. Okay, so charm, learning to control, learning to assert yourself. So putting on a performance. This is something that all of us have to do. Okay. And then being lied to about our culture and identity. These things are all things that can be regular in our culture. But the problem is where do they turn into dysfunction? Okay. And this is the interesting thing. So the more our culture gets complicated, and this is a cultural question, right? We want to ultimately look at what's our role in this. How do we solve it? How do we fix it? But culturally, we do have to start thinking, why is there more and more of this? Why are we having more and more of these issues? We've always had traumatic things. We've always had painful things. But why is trauma now manifesting with these very complicated and really dangerous things that happen within within our culture, real consistent. And this goes up with addiction, different manifestations of PTSD and so on. And then we hear about narcissistic personality disorder, borderline, sociopathic traits. These are all things that become rewarded in our culture in many ways. Now, I don't want to say that our culture says, screw somebody over to make yourself look better, but there's all sorts of ways where you could do that without really stepping over the line. So maybe you're exercising that muscle. Maybe you are stepping over that line, but you've compartmentalized and you're able to hide it from certain people. So you can actually build these traits more and more with our culture. So there's new pains in our culture, but there's more ways to express the dysfunction, okay? So that's important. Many normal things that we're doing that you have experienced, that everybody gets to experience in our culture, are ways for somebody who has some pain that's not resolved to hide it and turn it into something nasty, whether that's BPD or NPD or some of the other different personality disorders that we're going to talk about this week. That's what we're trying to determine. But now what we want to look at, how do these traits develop in men and women differently? And this is vital. And I think the reason why we want to look at how NPD and BPD manifest in men and women differently is we need to see that the person who's abused by this, they're going to be abused in a different way. And so if men are, suggested to heal in a way that women are healing, it may not work the same. And if women are healing from abuse in an abusive relationship, the way that men may heal, and they're suggested to do that way, there's going to be things that don't work, right? There's going to be things that aren't relatable. So it's not a comparison of who's better or worse. We're comparing to see the difference so we can realize how similar this is and how we can really attack this and defend it and work in the right sort of way, okay? So men, when, let's say, they grow up and they have these inconsistencies in their lives, they're oftentimes rewarded for power. So when they're shamed for their feelings and feel bad about something, whether they're told not to feel or they're told it's not important, or whether they're disciplined, what is the natural cultural reward? And I don't want to get into anything about toxic masculinity or the patriarchy or toxic femininity here or any of that stuff. What I want to look at is, what does our culture say? Because we're all responsible for our culture, right? We're all a part of this thing. And we want to go, okay, what are the outlets for a little boy or a young man when he feels shame or humiliation or on the outside of things? What are his available outlets to start looking to gain some sort of power, some survival skill that's developing here? All right. So emotionally absent fathers and maybe enmeshed with mothers. Okay. So if we have a generation of mothers that might parent in a certain way or allow a certain dysfunction to come through, what's going to happen there? Just like we have a generation or generations where fathers may not have been there, whether they were cut out or they didn't want to be there or whatever the reason, then this overstressed, perhaps a mother. And there were certain aspects that were consistent with women raising kids alone, where it might adore their kids too much. It might punish them. It might show a different form of conditional love. And it might build different resentments that are all targeted towards a woman. Likewise, if there's a father raising a child, there could be the same thing, right? And to put things in perspective, we were meant to go through the human experience with many people, all right? In fact, I take back the word meant, because if we go with any sort of evolutionary theory, where there's no design, there's no intention, right? There's just a randomness of how our brains formed and so on. But we were always around a lot of people, the same people for all of our life. And so now we have two people. Now it's back to one person. So a mom and a dad, and then it's just a mom or just a dad. And this isn't having the true diversity of lots of different things. And then we also have this culture where there's a lot of, you work for your identity, you're not seen as it. You have to fight for your importance. There's all these different things to gain value in it. And so what are the ways that men can go through that? All right, so men will perform to get their attention, to be powerful, to be right, to win, to have power, to fit the iconic images of a man. And these are their availabilities to go towards something. So when we start to manifest those things about like, how are we building our identity? What are we looking at? All right. Now, this does then move into things like the patriarchy and feminism and all these different things and the toxicities of both of those things. We have a huge society, this is both for men and women, right? Of the definition of what you can be as a man, and it's sold to us. Yet we don't have examples of the reality of that. This goes for women too, like the examples of what it means to be a popular woman, a good mom. These are all images with very few real tangible people. Like, so I could go and find out what it's like to be a good man by reading something online, but to know a good man and to see that man through all their decisions, it's not there. So I get this iconification of a hero, like a male hero. And same thing with women. We'll get into this in some of the other presentations that we have. But this is a huge thing. It causes a huge false solution for so many different things. So here with NPD, a lot of guys could have an inflated ego, a desire for power. They could have low empathy, and they could be status driven, because these are all things that are rewarded in our culture, and that could be good things, okay? With borderline for a man, which this is another thing too, like so much about modern psychology is worked against men just as much as women, in the sense of things like abuse and sexual abuse was not considered to be possible for men in the 80s, 90s, and before that. Like, psychology said that they were probably imagining it, or this only happens to women in these ways. And so men who had real abuse happen went to therapists, and it was kind of brushed off. Same thing happened with PTSD, misdiagnosed as anxiety and whatever type, different things, or chronic fatigue, but not seen as different traits of PTSD. And so when it came to borderline, it's often said that a man can't be borderline, until more recently they're saying, okay, this can happen, but this can manifest in rage and impulsivity. So control through aggression, high addiction rates, different things like that. Okay. So a man was taught to be powerful and not whole. Okay. And I really want to make this clear that if you follow my stuff, you know how critical I am over a lot of the arguments of toxic masculinity. I'm not saying it for that. I'm not saying it for that. I think that that is usually a lazy argument that is given to a lot of male problems, used to cancel them, and it devalues certain traits which could be good. So anger could have a good value. You know, rage might not be good, but it's going to happen. And so what do we do with that? Right? So this is very important to get within all of this. Power, but not whole. However, the general societal whatever, memorandum, the way to find wholeness as a man is oftentimes extremely flawed. So with women, when we enter into this, who grow up with this sort of instability, this sort of conditional love that they're taught, you have to do this and this in the right ways, with a highly competitive society, same thing that we've been talking about here with men, taught to please, taught to be attractive, taught to seek validation. Okay, so parentified or emotional surrogate in a family. This is actually something that I did not mention with young men, is oftentimes they become a surrogate parent as well. So how do young girls become surrogate parents? How do young boys become surrogate parents? This is really, really a terrible thing and puts a lot of pressure on a child. This is a really important thing that I think is not discussed enough when parents split and they say like, oh, it doesn't harm the kids. Causes tremendous pressure. I'm not saying that it has to, if you go through a divorce and a custody thing. I'm not saying it has to be torturous, but to just say, they're going to be fine because they get good grades and are active in extracurricular activities. There's so much extra pressure that causes extreme pain. And so this thing where young women who are growing up have to become surrogate parents, that puts a huge amount of pressure. Lots of codependency comes from it. It makes it all crazy, okay? So with NPD, a lot of times a woman will be covert. So she'll learn to compartmentalize differently than a man. A man will compartmentalize with power, suppress the emotions, never really has to look at it, and then, goes out in the world and finds rewards in certain ways. A woman can also do that, right? So she could have extreme bouts with power and so on, but there's going to be more of a compartmentalization, an ability to be a victim, an ability to be quiet. There's more of an aspect of being able to have their emotions heard, so it gets attention in certain ways. There's aspects with sexuality massively. So sexuality is exploited for both men and women on what it means to be a man or a woman and how that goes through. And it's not just so simple as yeah, man, the cheap and quick things we say about that, that goes so deep of how we take this natural urge for sex and sexuality and we commodify it in every way and all these different labels within our culture. And so we could do everything except our nature. You know, we can be a man or a woman for all of society's definitions, but not the natural urges that go with that. There's a huge conflict there. Okay. So a young woman is praised for being wanted, but not for being real. This is a common thing that comes through. So within this, there's also the cultural wound. Okay. So imagine this: young man, young woman has pain. They have some wound where it comes from the father, the mother, society, early childhood trauma, whatever it is. And then we get filtered through this culture that is going to reward attention-seeking behavior. You know, this is oftentimes the thing to do, to assert yourself, to be competitive, that if we're in a certain type of competition, it's okay to step on somebody's toes. Now, I want to be clear here. Competition is a natural part of many, many things. This could be as simple as playing games or something like that. But then when it comes to how do we get somebody to like us? How do we get somebody to accept our worth? How do we get somebody to like us more? And in this, we can see a competition. And in this, there could be something where it's seen as okay. So maybe it's a competition with academia. Maybe it's in your early 20s or 30s or 40s and you're competitive for a job. And it's okay to step on somebody's toes. Now, there's something there which in our society kind of has to happen, right? It's just like another thing I point out a lot. We weren't evolved, we were evolved to know everybody that we saw. This is like our brains and emotions and the reasons why we talk to people and have empathy and connection. That all came out of millions of years. So human beings, you know, 200, 300,000 years, people argue about it all the time. I don't know. But millions of years in humanoid form as mammals, we had this evolution to be able to connect with people and everybody that we saw. So everybody that we saw, we had a connection. Sometimes we feared them, but if we didn't have anybody, we had to connect first. So we had to have a group of people before we had fear over other groups of people. And now every day we pass by thousands of people and don't acknowledge them. And we actually can't. We have to hold back. Okay. So when we have pain from childhood, there's different ways where we can manifest that. We can objectify people and it's okay, right? Like we actually have to if we're being, you know, we walk through the mall and there's people, you know, selling us the Dead Sea salt or whatever it is, and they're hustling us. We have to be able to tell them to stop. We don't have to get to know them or have a true exchange of empathy. We have to start cutting them off. And then it gets more and more. Well, at work, we have to focus. We can't talk to you. I have to hang up this call now. I have to do this all the time with different clients. It's like, guys, I got to go. I cannot talk to you right now. Okay. So this is something that is a big deal when we're working through all of the different kind of training wheels that manifest for these dysfunctions later on in our life, right? Okay, so performance, seeking attention, seduction and victimhood, how to find sexual partners and get satisfaction, right? This is something that we have biological urges for, but how do we fulfill it? How do we fulfill it as a man? How do we fulfill it as a woman? What's our cultural narrative for that? And I don't mean just narrative like there's the undertone in movies. What are your outlets? You know, are you looking on apps? That's kind of what you might have to do. Are you going to bars? That's kind of outdated, you know, or you might do that. But there's only a few venues that we have for this. And so image is huge. Man, we have social media and we have to have that image. We have to compartmentalize our image. Okay. So borderlines are going to have different elements of rage, anger, giving up, sabotage. Where does our culture reward that? Because it does in certain times. If you get upset and get hysterical about certain topics, it's going to get you a lot of attention. If you sabotage yourself, it could get you a lot of attention. Okay. And with somebody like who maybe has the early stages of NPD, there could be times where you learn how to control something. This could be extremely useful in part of your job, but you learn to control it. This is the first time you learn what a boundary is, but it's done through control. Maybe there's a little bit of manipulation. Maybe when you have a certain attitude or a certain aggressiveness or a certain authoritative aspect of yourself, it becomes toxic, okay? And we don't realize the lines between it. It's kind of interesting because professionally, a lot of dysfunctional traits can come into play, and we may need them professionally for our jobs. But what makes them really bad is when it's to our mates, okay, our friends, and so on. So when we start treating friends, lovers, husbands, wives in these ways, it's generally seen as inappropriate and evil. However, what did I just say? What are the ways that our culture could reward it? And here's part of the trick. And this is where we get into a lot of the stuff with men in abusive relationships with women and women in abusive relationships with men. We get false allegations if there's a woman abusing a man. This is really common because it will overshadow a lot of the other stuff. And she's more understanding. If she's the narcissist in this or borderline, she's going to be more understanding of how that's going to work immediately. And if it's a man in this, he's going to shame her and humiliate her to a point to stop. And how's that going to happen? That's going to happen in ways of court or power, authority to make her stop, right? And in all of this, there's an element where the person being abused is humiliated for their good traits, and the person who's abusing disregards completely who they are and goes right for the kill. So if we're in a custody battle, if we're in anything with court, they're going to get the jump on us. We don't know we're being attacked until we've already been hammered down. We're always giving them the benefit of the doubt, right? Okay. So here's the thing where we end up. When we go through a breakup, we go through a custody battle, whatever it is, we've already been betrayed. We've already probably had a court ruling against us. And at this point, we start to realize, oh my God, we've been abused. And oh my God, we've been abused all these times. This is one of the interesting things that happens in our groups, and especially on the therapeutic side of our groups. If we really go back and inventory all the times when we've been abused, we didn't think we were abused. Now, we can call that gaslighting now, and we can call it red flags. And we could say if we have the right information about red flags, we're going to just be good. That's not true. So that doesn't happen. So this is one of the things that I really dislike about a lot of the information that comes out. And we'll probably have more videos on this. In fact, I've done so many live streams. I want to say that there was a live stream already about this. But when it comes to red flags, we know there's enough information about them, about the process, about people learning about red flags, is that everybody keeps repeating. The information about the red flags doesn't stop them. And I'll give you a breakdown. Let's go with an abused woman. Abused woman, let's say the most socially agreed upon form of abuse would be physical abuse. So a woman is physically abused. She goes to a woman's shelter. She gets the proper help for that, works with social workers on that. She gets educated on it. Her social circle, her friends, her immediate friends are like, man, I'm so glad you're not being abused anymore. And you have to start finding other people. So in this, she doesn't work and fix on the different things within herself. Why did she choose an abuser? Why did she like it? How does this go down to the deeper childhood roots? Kind of the things we were talking about before that may have manifested for a narcissist or a borderline What kind of issues with attachment, wounds that come from the father, the mother, whatever it is, right? What kind of stuff made them go, this is good? And what we also need to understand is that, man, this kind of guy that abuses me is good. After deciding that, so there's the beginning of it, right? So there's like if we parlay this into addiction, right? So they say, give an addict a hug. You know, an addict wasn't hugged enough, and the opposite of addiction is connection. Okay, so the disconnect, the problems, the traumas made this person an addict, but then the addiction takes over and starts writing a new thing. Okay, so then the hug doesn't matter. The hug isn't enough to bring them back to the point of the original wound. So with somebody with BPD or, well, in this case, I'm sorry, with somebody who's been abused, they're being physically abused, there's some sort of disconnect, some sort of trauma, some sort of pain that goes, I'm going to choose this guy. I'm going to choose the guy with the red flags and not notice them. But as the abuse starts and it moves into a relationship, then we move further away from that point, right? Into something where they really have a lot of damage and they become another person. Okay. And so that's where the unwinding, the healing, the therapy needs to start. It needs to start from that point. Okay. So let's say they understand an abusive man is not good. I'm clear on that. I have all this information about red flags. And she goes to start to date. Let's say it's a year or 6 months or whatever it is. It's probably usually less than that they're going to start. Okay. And they begin to date and they can't connect. They don't like this guy. There's something wrong with them. They don't understand it. And so in that, there's a pain because the pain then says this. It starts to write this. And this is with all dysfunction, addiction, the abuser, the abused, everything in between. This isn't working. Why is this not working for me? This hurts. I can't explain why it hurts. It's not logical, but I'm going on these dates. I'm trying to find this and it means nothing. And then you start to notice this guy and they kind of have some red flags, but it's not the same. They have different red flags and then they have justifications on why they're a good person. You go, you know what? They're all right. And you start to go, man, I feel comfortable with this person. Now are those things I can't explain, the empathy, the love, the seduction. I can't explain why I like this person, but I like this person. And why would I listen to all these people? I get that I don't want to be abused, but why would I listen to it? Because it's now painful and this feels good. And then you start to move away from the knowledge or whatever. And then there's a little bit of abuse, but you actually know how to handle it and you know what to do in it. And in a way, there's a strange comfort. Like at least you know what you're getting and it's not that bad. And that it escalates and escalates and escalates. And this is how this happens. And nobody really looks at this when it comes to dysfunctional relationships. We just have this idea of that it's unacceptable and bad. And the same thing goes with men. Same exact thing. First off, there's not as much available information on what an abusive woman is because we can't, right? Even on my videos, it's like you're talking about abuse to men and women abusing men, you must hate women. There's just a difference. There's a difference between the two, right? And you need to give a space for men because they really have none. So men don't like saying they're abused because they have to talk to women that they can't relate with as much about the abuse. It's not because they dislike women, it's that it's not the same language. Abuse done onto a male has a uniqueness, just like abuse done to a woman. There's a value in talking to a woman. If you only had men available to talk to as a woman, it would be really, it would be horrible to a woman. I mean, I think most women can agree with that. Now, sometimes there could be value with tremendous value to talking to some men about it and some male therapists or whatever it is. But you kind of get how women need their space for this. So with men, they have less options. They have less people willing to hear on what abuse is. Talking to a man, him saying he was abused, it's like, what does that even mean? Most people even say that's not possible. Like when a man says he's abused, many women will say, but it's different for a woman. So before he could even express himself, there's not an opportunity. So men hit these walls in all these different ways. So there's less men who can work with men on recovery, and there's less outlets, and there's the general social pressure for it. So there's that problem. Okay. So again, we're not comparing because one's better than the other or worse than the other. We're comparing because we have to see them different so we can get to solutions and find some sort of unity in all of this. Okay. So in this, there's actually a section written here on the subclinical parts of NPD and BPD. I'm going to save that for a latter live stream, and the reason for that is because what that actually means is there's parts where people could be borderline or narcissistic, but not fully manifesting it. You know, maybe it hasn't developed, it hasn't moved into something. But what I want to start to talk about, and skipping that part, is why were we attracted to these people? And this is the part nobody wants to hear, because when we're a victim, we get to this point where we go, oh, we're a victim. They're bad and I was good. If we don't look at why we chose these people, we're going to enter into that same loop, right? This doesn't mean that they're not bad. And I'll tell you this, like on the road to forgiveness and wholeness, it's a very personal process on this, but I can tell you, especially from working with highly traumatized people in general, and I have a huge amount of experience with men, but with females and addicts and people who've been kidnapped and tortured and all these different things, you don't need to forgive right away. You don't need to follow the Instagram or, whatever internet philosophy on what forgiveness is when we get to real pain. Deep pain, in order for forgiveness to be worth something, we have to look deeply at it. If we're going to look deeply at that, we don't get to just say that they're bad and we're good. We have to start looking at, why did we like them? How is it that our relationship with the abuse, because remember, as I said, as it was happening, we didn't really say it was abuse. In retrospect, we go, that was a red flag. But in human decision making, in empathy, connection, in sexuality, which we almost never talk about, it's not a logical process of seeing red flags. There's something that makes us feel good. There's something that makes us attracted to them. There's something that works within sexuality, which is different than empathy, of why we like it. This is really, really important. Okay. So why did we like that? And what did it grow into? Because remember, there's the point where we accept this kind of odd character and abuse isn't yet happening. So we got to work on that, right? That's usually that childhood stuff. But then it turns into its own thing when the abuse starts. When we start to brush it off, accept it, enable it, work with it, make excuses for it, diminish ourselves for it. It's an interesting argument within codependency, is in a lot of codependency, the first wave, if we start working on it, is I accept people and think less of myself. And if I think less of myself, then I forgive other people and accept all the stuff. And I'm always a fixer. And people stay there for a little bit. But there's another element to where I manifest that I gain my worth and my power. And it's also a form of sickness, manipulation, and even where I would say things like NPD come in, to where you're always the abuser or the abused. You're always creating drama. You're always having an emergency. You're always having chaos. And this then becomes the abuse. That this crazy cycle happens. And it's real common when you look at the deeper levels of codependency. So we want to look at why did we fall in love with this? Why did we like it? How are we not in love with it, but we're sexually attracted to it? How is it that we built lives within this? Why is it that we're ashamed? How is it that they know to attack us? This is one of the things that also is not discussed in narcissistic abuse. This comes up all the time in my groups, is that we're in this area where we get sexually manipulated by them. So one of the ways that they'll attack us is they'll attack us by knowing our secrets, bringing up different points of shame sexually with us, uh, knowing different kinks that we're into. And then they'll make this public and make this a big fear. So this is one of those things of where we get attacked over and over again with it. Why are we looking at that? Why is it that these things happen in our lives? And again, if we're a victim, I agree, we're a victim. Like, I'm not saying that this isn't diminished from that. We have to start looking at those things because we have to unwind it. And even if we are truly victimized, this always comes up, especially in addiction recovery. Well, this person abused me. This person hurt me. This person did this sort of assault on me that everybody agrees was illegal, and it happened to me. I had no say. And you're saying for me to be responsible of that. I'm not saying that you need to be responsible for harm that is done to you. You need to be responsible for the work that's necessary to get through it. And if you don't, you're going to be punching that clock. You're going to be continuing that abuse into new decisions in your life. So for instance, if let's say I get hurt, if I get beaten up, if there's some sort of sexual assault that's done on me, and let's say I'm 16 years old or 15 years old, and I go through life and I learn to survive from that, and I make decisions, I build resilience, I can have confidence, I can learn to communicate properly around all of these different things. And these are good things. That doesn't mean that I'm at peace with it. I understand it. That if it manifests in a new way when I'm 35 or 40 or 60, that I just get a buy because when I was 16, 17, 18, 25, I was able to not have it affect me in ways. I have to be able to relook at it because these things pop up in different areas in your life. And if you've had relationships with abusive people, I can almost guarantee you that it's going to continue to pop up in your life, right? It will change with the arc of who you are. So careers, power, different downfalls in your life, these things are going to re-manifest. They usually do. And you should be prepared for it and not ashamed of that. Okay. So if I have some sort of abuse that I experienced, let's say when I was 16, and I'm not prepared to look at that, deal with it, find the answer to it, get support around it. And these things definitely exist, right? There's tons of misinformation on it, but there are consistent ways of dealing with this that have been around since a long time. So 1960s, 70s, there was great work done on this. And in between then, there's a whole bunch of misinformation too. But there are good modalities of healing through it. If I don't solve it, it gets passed on. All right. So we need to understand there's always a cause and effect to our life. That's how much worth we have. That's how valuable we are. That's how powerful we are. There's always a cause and effect to all of our actions. So the imprint of our life, as much as we'd like to never think about it again, with our society so complex and all these different things with identity and probably things I'll get into in other live streams, we're almost guaranteed that we have to be responsible for all of our actions. This is just how powerful we are with the outlets that we have in our society and culture. Okay, so let's look at this. When we get into the origins of NPD and BPD, you have to understand that they're based around trauma. Okay, trauma has always been in humanity. In hunter and gatherer days, trauma, tragedy was always there. But there's less of an outlet for us to disperse it. So whether that's our internal family systems of how we interact and relate, which is, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of hierarchy. Love is earned, love is conditional. When we then take that pain and put it through the filter of gender, okay, so what are the ways for a young man, a young woman to be able to find coping mechanisms, to get attention, to be able to show their identity? What can they grow into? What are their goals? How do those things manifest within our culture? And then there's our general culture reward system. So there could be great benefit to keeping secrets, to having compartmentalized identities, to being able to find power in certain ways, to be able to get attention through emotion, through power, through anger. There's all sorts of benefits to that. So the cultural narrative is big. And again, this isn't to have us get hysterical about culture. Then life starts to have problems where these things stop working and a collapse happens. And because this pain, this wound never had to be dealt with, or maybe there's many wounds, or maybe it was dealt with a little bit, but not complete. We don't have faith in a healing modality. We want to get rid of it, sweep it under the rug, all those different things. In that, what we want to do, or what then happens, is in that cultural collapse, we deny everything. We lie about it. So the narcissist or borderline moves into full explosion, reinvention of things. And then there's another cultural benefit to it. So we didn't really get into it in this one, but I have just hordes of videos on custody battles and what to do in this. But when that collapse happens, there's all sorts of ways to disperse the blame. Okay. Maybe I did something that is bad or shameful. I don't want to look at that. I'm going to seek power. I'm going to seek some manipulation to cover that up. And you know what? I'm going to even not believe it because I can cut it out of my mind. And now I'm going to find all these outlets in our culture of false accusations, of blame, of shaming, of finding power over other people to just destroy it. Okay. So what we're going to talk about in the upcoming live streams this week is there's going to be some live streams on culture, which you might be like, hey, man, that's kind of weird. We're also going to look at different hidden personality disorders. So I actually think it's kind of bad when we just talk about NPD, because BPD is huge, but there's also other things. Like, why aren't we talking about Munchausen's? Why aren't we talking about finding the unique pattern of the person who abused us so we could get to the root of it? Okay. So I think we get lazy when we just find something easy to talk about that makes us go, oh my God, she or he was such a terrible person. I don't need to worry about myself. We need to start being a little, well, not a little, we need to be really vigilant about this so that we can get it. Okay. In this also, if you have any questions or comments, if you're on my email list, which we're going to start changing that and advertising a little bit differently. If you're watching that now, it's the 30 and 30 high conflict custody portal, which is great if you're going through a high conflict custody battle. But we're going to have different live streams where we can interact. So right now, the Zoom line is open and there's a couple people, man, just a few people have joined on the Zoom line. We're going to open that up for questions where guys can ask questions. Guys or gals can ask questions about what's going on in whatever situation they have. In this case, more than likely custody. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff. There's a whole course on these personality disorders. For one, healing through it. And two, using this to win in your custody case, which there's no guarantee towards that. But the idea is, how do we stop getting blindsided by this? How do we start understanding their pattern? And how do we start interpreting that into a court of law so we don't just get manipulated and screwed over, which is usually what happens so commonly. So what we're going to do right now is on YouTube and on TikTok. If you're not a part of the high conflict custody list, you won't be able to get onto the Zoom call. But if you get on the next one, you can be on Monday night's live stream or Q&As or whatever. Probably going to do about 3 of those a month. So we may or may not do another one this week, but I'm going to get started on that. And until then, like, share, subscribe, and all that sort of good stuff. Okay, cool. If you have questions here on TikTok, I'll look through them, but I'm more than likely going to get inundated with questions on the Zoom. And then there's also YouTube going. So there's TikTok and YouTube and whatever. Hold on, let me pause this for a second. Okay. Okay, so sounds great. I'd like to join you. What days and times will you be putting these on? Well, I hope you would join me. We do live streams Mondays, sometimes Sundays, and then we have group calls on high conflict custody 7 days a week. And there's 9 or 10 calls pretty good stuff, but those are in the paid groups. So on the free stuff, we'll say live streams probably 3 times a week, usually at night. Tomorrow night, it'll be a little bit earlier than this one. And just so you know as well, I have the largest and longest running group of men who have won in high conflict custody. And man, there's a lot of proof towards that. So it's some good stuff. And I am proud of the guys in my groups who've helped put this together. Okay, dudes on Zoom, I'm going to say this. So right now, the speakers from my computer are muted, but when that comes on, my microphone will pick it up. And this will be heard on the live streams on TikTok. It will also be heard on the live streams on YouTube. And I'm recording it and may use it for clips. I don't want you to say anything that you don't want to say. If you get nervous during any of this, you can stop. I'm not here to pressure you. We have tons and tons of content. So this is here to serve you, but I could use it for whatever content purposes. So if you want to talk, that's cool. You don't need to share like super detailed stuff. And just keep that in mind. And oh my God, somebody sent me $20 on YouTube. Thank you so much. Man, that's so cool. I think that's so cool that that can happen. And I appreciate it. You guys don't have to, but I appreciate it so much. That's super, super cool. Like, I can't tell you how thankful I am of that. Anyway, Zoom dudes, if you want to talk, just raise your hand. I'm going to unmute it now. And I'll only say your first names as well. I'm not here to blow anybody's anonymity. Anybody got any live questions on the Zoom? Well, I take a drink of my lukewarm tea. Questions, comments?
Not a comment, Steve.
What's up, man? How are you?
I'm doing well. I've been following you for a while, and you've definitely encouraged me for a while now, man. I don't actually have a custody issue. I've been divorced for 2 years, but I wanted your opinion and also some encouragement on this. So I'm in Houston, Texas. I have a pretty good ironclad 50-50 custody agreement, but I'm dealing with I don't know if it's considered parent alienation, but you know how it is, man. You go from being with your kids every single day to being, it's being chopped away. So I get them the first, the third, and the fifth, which I always get them. But my ex-wife won't let me talk to them at all. So it's almost like every time I get them, I'm having to rebuild. And my oldest, we're doing great. But my youngest, I have 2 boys, 9 and 10. And I want to say 2 weeks ago, my youngest boy just completely, went left on me, because it was for his birthday. They're 11 months apart. So in September, his birthday was amazing. We had a blast. But for my oldest, it was his birthday 2 weeks ago. And my youngest, for some reason, he wasn't very happy about that. I mean, he made up a big story, and my ex pretty much let him, just act a fool, for lack of words. But on the good side, I literally just dropped him off today. We had a great visit. I was pretty upset, but I just, took a deep breath, and I just have in my mind, I'm going to show up for them, every time, no matter what, as long as I'm able to. But I'm not going to lie, man, for 2 years, it's been like devastating. I'm literally just getting over not being able to speak with them, regularly. And I mean, man, they have iPads and everything, like they're in group chats with their cousins, but she's like, heck no, like y'all just can't talk to them. So that's just something I'm dealing with, man. I wanted your opinion on that, and some encouragement if possible. Like, how would you deal with the situation? Because I talked to my lawyer, and as you know, they can't really do anything about communication. They just basically say, hey, get them on your time, and that's that,
Yeah.
But I just, that's my what I want to, get your opinion on, man. Appreciate the time.
Man, dude, thank you so much. Like, so there's guys that are a part of my groups, and I love it because it keeps me afloat. It's like how I make a living. I'm living pretty modestly with all of this, but everybody that I'm working with that, like, man, I want you to have answers. I want you to have community. And I'll just say to you, man, like, if you can get numbers from guys who are on here, who are in my groups or resources or whatever, like, I mean, on this free Zoom chat, what I usually say on my calls is I tell everybody, I said, man, put your numbers in the chat and start talking to each other. So even though you're on here on the free side of it, man, do it. Like, you're not alone in all of this. It's super important. But now let's get to the questions here. So how long has this parenting plan been happening?
So I've been divorced for 2 years now.
Okay.
Like a little over 2 years. I want to say if this is 2025. The ink dried in March of 2023.
But like, you guys have been separated for that time too?
Oh yeah. So
okay.
I was separated maybe about 6 months prior to that. But yeah, we've been divorced. Like, I'm having my own house. She's where she is. Yeah, for this whole time.
And how long have you been on the first, third, and fifth?
For this whole time.
Nice. Okay, so good for you, man. Like, first off, it's really fortunate that you got that, because even though this is happening and it sucks, and this is a real problem that almost every parent has to deal with, man, the fact that you're starting off with some visitation is just awesome. So props on that. Here's the thing, man. In my groups, we have therapists that come on and talk about this, and they're awesome therapists. And just to understand how bad this screws up a child, like the choosing between parents, it's really, really bad. So a couple things, this can be hard to do, but you don't talk trash on the mom. Don't try and explain, like, usually it's best. Okay. So obviously get your own therapist on this, or do your due diligence on researching about the smartest choice in this. But when you involve them in what's going on between mom and dad, it's not good. So for instance, if I have a conflict with my kids, I want to tell them, because I'm like, I want to fill you in on the truth. I want to respect you, child. But in the long run, what we've looked at, and man, just what we've seen in our groups, because we had, my buddy Gary came in and his kid was like 3 or 4, and now she's an adult and graduated from college and all this sort of stuff. But like, so within all of this, you see how much damage that causes. And so we generally default to this not being the best thing. So try and keep that separate. And how this conversation goes is like, well, moms, dads have their words about things. But just know that both of us love you, or that I love you in this way. But you don't need to answer those questions with an explanation of why she's doing what she's doing. They need stability as a father that they can trust. So here's part of the long game, right? Is that if you put that pressure on them, they think they have to choose. If they see that they're not getting an answer, that really sucks. That's harmful. But they can start having faith in a father and start going that this father was making the better choice to not let them choose. And this is far better in the long run. This is really, really important. Now, the other thing too is you need to have space for them to talk and to interact. And actually, I'll tell you this, man. There's dudes on the live on the Zoom right now that are in this exact situation in the group. And I would just really encourage everybody here, put their number in the chat. If you don't have to, by all means, like, if you don't want people calling you, don't do that. But like, you could probably build some good connections in here. No guarantees, but like, it's a pretty good thing. I think that when it comes to this sort of alienation, it would be more like called interference in anything. So parental alienation has like a psychological term, an internet term, and a court term. And the court term is the weakest, okay? And the psychological term is still information. And then the internet term means all this sort of stuff. And so what's kind of happening here in your situation is your kids have a bond broken with you because they can't talk and they can't interact. You could go.
And also,
go ahead.
She's very like vocal with her displeasure with me, because I mean, she was a stay-at-home mom at one point in time, so she's very vocal. And that was actually one of the issues, Steve. Like, I don't even speak on her at all. Like, I ask, dad questions, like, when they get in, I just check in with them, like, hey, how are you guys doing? Is there anything we need to talk about? You know, I'm just letting you guys know I'm here. And like, man, he went left. You know, like you said, I think just confused from hearing the things that she's saying, because they come and tell me, and I try to just calm them down. I'm like, hey, we're not gonna dump, you know, all this at one time. Let's just enjoy our weekend. And kind of towards the end of the visit, if they need to tell me something, I let them. But I try not to never let them just dump out everything. And my family, and I don't, you know, honest to God, truth, man, I don't bash her at all, because I mean, it doesn't benefit me. That's still their mother, and they're with her, you know, majority of the time. But yeah, that's another thing too that I'm dealing with. Yeah, she trashes my name, and I'm actually getting ready to start spending a little more time. Thank God, because they're getting in basketball, so they're gonna need a ride, you know, to practice and everything. So I'm gonna have to gear up to being around her.
Hey man, that stuff is some of the most fun, but it gets so hard because every new point, a phase of a child's life is another point for the other parent to manipulate a little, right? So with sports and all that stuff, but dude, look, man, I'm going to share some stuff, and I want to cut out as much personal information out of this because it has to do with the clients in the group and so on. So I'm going to try and hybridize it. But severe parental alienation, you don't get to see your kids for a couple of years or something like that, and you reintroduce the child, even if it's 6 months, man, that child is a different child forever. They're different, right? And I don't want to sound like dramatic in a horrible way. Sometimes it's really horrible, and sometimes it's just different. But they're going to be more apprehensive. They've, you know, we're breaking down kind of like the stuff with NPD and so on, or BPD, the compartmentalization of who you have to be in different situations is forced upon a child. This is so damaging, man. Like when we're talking about narcissists or borderlines, man, I hope that's all that happens to them. But like the severe depression, major addiction, whatever crazy stuff becomes harder because your way of solving a problem is to talk to mom in one way, dad another way. And you have to, right? Teachers in another. When you're having a bad day, you talk to dad in this way, but when you're having a bad day, you talk to mom in this other way. And there's all these things you have to figure out. It's so screwed up. Like this is the bedrock of so much dysfunction. And so in all of this, like I think it's super important. Like what I've found probably the most valuable tool in this is Jen, the therapist in our group. She's got like 35 years experience working with like a lot of very intense individuals. Awesome. And then also there's different codependency groups. There's actually a guy on here now who's pretty awesome with that. Actually, he may have bailed off. Oh, well, whatever. He's gone. But, you know, like there's a lot of people who do work in this. And I think it's something, there's resources. So if you can't seek that out, like if you can't get a hold of a good therapist or something like that, seek around some other men who've been around this. Like for instance, I'll say this, in Austin, Texas, there's an amazing men's group that's for free. That's for, like there could be this in Houston, right? It's once a week where you can go and talk to a bunch of dads who've been in ultra, they've had relationships with all sorts of crazy women, right? And they talk about the solution, and it's one of the best things because, you know, like back to this thing, like I don't really want to mention stuff with the guys in the groups, but let's say like a guy's friend or even partner, his current wife, will say, well, it's good to be open with the children about pressures they're having. And they'll impose it too much. And you want to be open. Like that's the delicate thing. It's like, hey man, you know, you can talk to me, right? And it's different, I think, with boys and girls too. So I have all boys, right? And there's a huge divide in the group with, you know, men who have daughters and sons or a mix, because how you talk to them through problems is really unique, right? And so when they're talking to their sons or daughters, it's like, hey, I'm here. We can talk about whatever. But man, I'm here doing my thing. And try and be as constant and solid as possible. And the other thing too, like there's always a right thing that could be wrong for somebody else and a wrong thing that could be right for somebody else. So oftentimes in our culture, we say as men, we need to share more. Like you need to share, you teach your kids to emote. So then in these high conflict situations, these men, it's just like, they share too much, right? And there's a time and a place for that. So it's not always bad. These are some of the things I really dislike about the toxic masculinity argument, because it basically says that men need to heal in this politically correct way or whatever it is. And yeah, men need to express. Like men express all the time in my groups. Like there's all sorts of that, right? But it's not how general politically correct culture would say how it has to be. And there's almost like an enforcement of, oh, you're hurt? Well, you need to cry in this way. You need to do it this way, or else it's not right. You're not doing it right. You're toxic in some way. And so I think with our kids, there's a lot that seeps into advice to parents in general on that you should be overly expressive and tell them everything because it's the truth, or we need to respect our emotions, or this is good and healthy. And a lot of times I think it presents instability. And again, this isn't just oh man, I got restricted on TikTok. Recommendation restricted to search results for 10 minutes left. Does not comply with feed eligibility standards. Reason. It doesn't give me the reason. Man, that's crazy. I guess somebody explained. Well, whatever. Okay, so anyway, TikTok is out. Let's see if I'm on YouTube. YouTube is not out. And man, somebody donated money. Thank you so much. So back to this thing of when we share too much, it could be seen as something that is unstable. And we have to be really solid. So this is another big thing when it comes down to parenting, especially in high conflict. There's a crazy person attacking us. Our kids see that. We need to make sure we're really stable. So this is like a really important thing in our groups that we have to emphasize on how good of fathers we have to be. And that's hard, man. There's not a lot of outlets for it. When we look at being a good father, what does that mean? And then we look at all these false archetypes of what like a man is supposed to be and all this sort of stuff. So I think a lot of that is like, okay, we can handle adversity. We could move forward. We could handle our emotions. We want to be an even emotional keel for our kids, and we want to be consistent. And our kids are going to open up. And man, I'll tell you this, and just watching generations of kids, it's so important to not have a parent that is overbearing about what you have to be, and have a parent that's solid so a kid can be a kid. Hopefully that makes sense. Like, so a parent is solid to have consistency with their emotions, what they do, whatever routine, so your child can be a child. And when it's, you have to be this way and all this enforcement, it gets all screwed up. Anybody have anything for our H-Town man, Houston? You got a couple names going on here, so I'll just call you Mr. Houston.
I got you. And I put my phone number, my email in the chat too.
Well, hit them up, dudes, if you dare. And some of the people on here are in my group. Some of the people on here are just visiting like you, but man, welcome. And I appreciate that. You got any other questions, man?
No, sir, but I'm gonna definitely try to get in touch with you on your site, man. And because I go to Austin a lot, and I have some pretty good guys that are mentors, like in their 50s, that give me good advice. But yeah, that's definitely missing here in Houston, man. With it being such a big city, it's hard to find different groups. I mean, I have different friends that been in my situation, but not many groups that deal with this specific thing.
It's hard to find, man. It's hard to find. But dude, man, thank you so much. You're welcome to stay on and even ask more questions if you want. I'm just going to open it up for other people. But man, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
Who else has a question or comment? I'll probably stay on about 20 more minutes. I don't know. You get me talking. I don't shut up. But man, crazy. Somebody complained on TikTok saying I was saying inappropriate things. Jesus. Come on. Any other questions or comments, guys? You know, one of the things that you guys should understand with all of this is that what's so complicated about things with, and like tonight we were talking more about stuff with like NPD and BPD, but anything with custody is it's a day-by-day emotional check. Like you can't just read something and you're good. It's just like our buddy in Houston was talking about. The same thing happens to me, man. I can have all the confidence in the world. This is one of the things like I really dislike about a lot of like men's advice, because there is a male confidence. There is a way to find assertion and power, but there's also things that will screw you up when they happen, right? So if I have an issue with an ex and custody or whatever, childcare, something like that sneaks up, it still spins you off. You can have all the confidence in the world. You can have all of the whatever, but it amazes me that there's this story, and it is so not true. It's not just a lie. It's just, why are we doing this to ourselves? That we say, if we're a confident man or a woman, we can move past when our kids are being withheld or psychologically tortured or used as pawns in a game between our conflict. That is going to mess with you, like it should mess with you. You know, I mean, like, why are we saying that this should be like, man, I just got it down so good, we're good. No, man, it doesn't work that way. So anyway, that's that. Anybody else got questions or comments? And if you are on here on the Zoom call, you don't need to talk, but if you do unmute, like the speakers are live on my computer, if you were to unmute, you can also raise your hand. I'm only going to call you by your first name. You don't need to share too much. You're more than welcome to, contribute, put your number in, or take anybody else's number. Like, you could even blow up the chat if you like. There's only a few people here. But if you do talk, the people on TikTok who said I posted something bad and are lying, maybe not you, but you're out there. But the people on TikTok can hear you, and the people on YouTube Live can hear you. And YouTube just has a couple people too. Sunday night. It's a quaint group. But yeah, guys, any questions or comments? I'm all for it. And if not, I'm good too, because I've been on calls for 4.5 hours tonight. It's pretty wild, which we had an amazing call earlier. Let's go into the chat. Steve, I believe you said crazy too. Maybe that means I said I was crazy. You're right. Okay. Let's see here. Hey, y'all. God bless all the good folks and children. Well, hey, I'll drink some tea for that. Okay. Seems like some narc complained against you, Steve. Man, it seems like it too. They're the culprits. Isn't that bias? Crazy woman. Okay. It's so weird. Okay, I just won in the state of Washington in an ugly divorce. Man, we've had a lot of guys. Actually, some of our best cases have come from Washington, which is pretty cool. I'll be getting a hold of you when I get off work. All right. Okay.
For that, because it seems like some narc.
Man, getting some feedback there. Okay. Are you saying you're helping narcissistic men get custody? I always love this, and this is the same person. This is probably the person who complained about me. But are you okay? I have ranted about this so much, but Corgi Lover 4.0, man, You got me sucked in. I'm going to get to you in one moment here. But so every time I help a men's group, this is what men have to go through. So first off, are you saying you're helping narcissistic men get custody? No, I'm not saying that at all. And these comments come up all the time, and they're kind of like a waste of time. Why am I speaking to it? Because this is an example of what men go through. So men or women being abused is not good. It's terrible. We need to stop it. But whenever men get any sort of help that's geared towards them, there's this thing of like, wait, so you're helping men do what? You're not helping them in the way that we know men need to be helped? Let me just tell you this, like of watching men of helping men for 20 years, I don't see a lot of people helping men. So there's all these ideas on what is supposed to help men more and how they process through their pain. But here's the thing. One, men have pain. Most of society says they don't. Most of society says that most of men's pain, which actually exists, that I've dealt with for 20 years, people say is actually just a manifestation of toxic masculinity, and that male pain is all because they don't know how to emote or feel, which is not true. So then things like custody issues, narcissistic abuse from women, real abuse, physical violence, sexual abuse, PTSD, whatever, is all diminished to say, well, it's not that big of a deal. And so then it's not only men have pain, it's said that it's something that it's not, then it's compared to women's pain. Now, the men in pain aren't saying they're saying we want to be heard. We want to solve this pain. They're not trying to compare it with women or not. So it's got to go through this filter of that, well, they don't really have pain. And then it's really this when it's not that. And then women have it worse. And this is the filter of every single guy. And this is really fucked up when you think about it. Okay, so sexual abuse, physical violence, domestic violence done towards men, false accusations. It's all met with this filter. And then because it's so heavily compared with female pain, you look at women who get attention for that, and the men go, well, wait a minute, she gets attention for that and I don't. So then they get sucked into the comparison, right? Which is where you lose, because pain can't really be compared. It's just such a screwed up thing. So guys' outlets for all of this is limited by our society. And like, what happens when there is actual pain? Again, if women have pain, it needs to be dealt with and served. I'm not saying it shouldn't. But when you have actual pain and it's ignored, it's said to not exist, then it's called something that it's not. And then it's compared and diminished. Like it's not as good as this other thing. This other pain is the real pain. Men are just complaining. Let me tell you the irony of the whole idea of toxic masculinity, which they say roots from men not being able to express themselves because they're told to man up. Our society is telling men, you're complaining too much. What happens when that chain happens? When there's real pain, actual things happening, and it's denied. You get depression, you get isolation, you get alienation, and then you get terrorists. And I'm not saying that any of those things are justified. What I'm saying is those things are being put forth as a petri dish for disease in our culture. This is horrible. So nowhere in this live stream am I encouraging anybody who's narcissistic get custody. And I'm sick of me trying to make information for these underserved people that are ignored, which is anybody losing in this. Like, you're really underserved because the court systems just suck for everybody. But like, I'm sick of that being turned into like some mic drop moment that allows somebody to be canceled, or like, this is poisonous, toxic. No. We have serious issues. We're not going to solve them with gossip and cheap social media crap. We're going to solve them through hard work with our society and culture. And that's going to start with your issues and not talking shit and gossiping on a bunch of crap. But on that note, we're going to get to a question with somebody who has their hand raised. So just really unmute my computer. I just want to tell you, one, I know you, welcome. But before I turn my speakers on, you're being recorded. So there's a camera that's recording. There's the YouTube live stream that's recording. And there's the TikTok that is being broadcasted, but I don't think it's saved or recorded. But if it is, go figure. Now, if you don't want to talk, that's cool. If you're uncomfortable with answering anything, that's cool. I'm not here to cause a problem. This, as you know, this is just a service to folks out there watching it to know that they could get some help in some different ways. I'll just call you by your first initial, and I'll unmute you now. So if you want to talk, Big C, what up,
Steve.
baby? How are you?
Steve, thanks for bringing up this topic. I think this is a big topic that gets a lot of stigma to it, it seems. I think my main question regarding this is, like, how is it different that women present these types of behaviors than men? I really wasn't familiar with any of this stuff until, like, right before, in the year before I kind of ended up with my divorce and separation. I started getting called a narcissist and saying that I was gaslighting and, things like this. And I was like, I didn't even really pay attention to it. I was just like, what is this? Like, what are these? Like, it was almost like somebody was swearing at me and I didn't really understand why or what, or like, I just didn't even think about it. And then, after the divorce, you realize that these are like very stigmatic terms that people throw around, that surround this kind of high conflict, post-separation life. I think the thing that bothers me the most about it is when you hear your kids start calling you a narcissist or, gaslighting and kind of, mimicking these things that they've heard over time. Just how do you manage this? Like, and how is it present differently, maybe, between, moms and dads, or, husbands and wives, and things like that?
Man, dude, there's such a loaded thing to this, and it always pisses off the other side when you talk about it. But I just want to make this clear. We have a culture where there's a lot of people who don't have a solid identity about themselves. And I'm not trying to say that in like a political hot topic way. Like, me is Steve always needs to prove himself to the public to have worth. And there could be a good thing to that. There's like competition and to progress and make things more. But this is always what's happening. In those forms of competition are often called narcissistic traits or selfish traits or these types of things. And so it's kind of easy to always point this out, right? And we have this culture that's always doing this back and forth. Where it's problematic is when especially like just in divorce and custody, you cancel the other party out, you make them worthless, you objectify them as an animal or subhuman or something that needs to be discarded. And then this justifies reasons to hate, attack, put them in jail, whatever it is, to erase them. And there's so many freaking problems to that. Like, I think it's like a big cultural deal. But think about this. Women can be victims in what way? Through violence, abuse, being afraid of anything. Men can't be victims in those ways. So, and again, like, we're comparing not to say better or worse, but we have to understand this is the man's problem. This is the woman's problem. Okay. And we want to talk about both. But a man can't say he's afraid for his life. He can, but it's going to enter so much resistance. Okay. A man, if he gets emotional, like, what happens? Like, if a woman gets emotional and hysterical, it's like, man, she's afraid. Let's comfort her. Okay. And maybe there should be some really good value to that, right? Like, there's things where that could be worthy in our culture. Like, I'm not saying to erase that. It's kind of like toxic masculinity. Competition is bad. A man won't cry. This is bad. There's all sorts of reasons why that could have some sort of benefit. But in this case, if a man cries, it's then seen is you should because you held it in, or there's not a sense of like that he could be terrified or broken in half and scared for his life for his kids. That's not the reason. It's that he's just getting started in the healing that has been ignored. So it's kind of it's pretty crazy, right? And then if a man is hurting a woman, there's where are the places where he could find favor in the culture? Dominance, power, intimidation, right? And so what is so disturbing about all of this is if somebody's narcissistic, they're leveraging, like, narcissism, borderline, any personality disorder, it works within the culture that allows it. Again, I'm not saying this that our culture we need to get hysterical about, but only a man can gain power to manipulate others in a way that the culture allows. And only a woman can gain power in the culture over men or whoever in the way that the culture allows. And so a lot of times that's going to be through sexual manipulation, emotional manipulation, making up false allegations. And here's the thing that like Jen pointed out. So Jen, the therapist on our calls, she had said that one, we don't know enough about this because therapy is voluntary. So we might know some information of court-ordered psych evals, but there's not a lot of information. There's people who go in and say, I have a problem, and then they get diagnosed with NPD or BPD or something like that. And then that's where the meat of the information comes from. That's very few people, right? And then in the court system, it's even worse. So we've talked about this, like third parties and all this sort of stuff. They're trained to see abusive men because our culture decided that men abusing women was really bad. And I think our culture is spot on with that one. There's no criticism there, right? We need to have as much knowledge as possible for women, children being hurt, and men. So our culture does not know enough about how men are abused. And let's just go with the physical, right? This does happen. There's guys on here right now that were physically abused in ways that the police filed criminal charges. It's super rare that that happens. But then if we're really going to respect abuse, if we're really going to respect the dangers and damage of physical abuse or even sexual abuse to women, children, men, anybody, right? If we're going to respect that, we should start studying, which we don't, on all the cases that get unfounded, and then even cases that go on the criminal level and get proven to be wrong. So unfounded is just unfounded. Like we don't get information we don't get any sort of retribution if somebody lies about false allegations. There's like no consequence. So a man or a woman, although this happens more to men, not because women are more evil than men, but because they have an opportunity to do this. If men have an opportunity to do this and they're dysfunctional men, they'll do it, right? So because it's easier for a dysfunctional woman to do this than a dysfunctional man, false allegations of sexual abuse and violence happen all the time to men. There's tons of cases that are unfounded. These aren't studied because they're unfounded. They're like inert. They're not saying that the woman lied. But there's so much information on this. Judges, GALs, social workers, custody evaluators, CPS, DCFS workers, they are not trained on what those people do when they lie. All of that should be studied. So for instance, like a social worker has an experience, they go, oh, well, the person probably lied. I don't need to deal with it. I need to focus on this and I need to go with business or whatever it is, right? We should be taking that information, taking the patterns of what people who make false allegations say and do and study it, but they don't. Like in our group, we see it all the time. Like false sex abuse allegation. So a false sexual abuse allegation that is done by a woman who's probably been abused. Like, again, this is terrible. She needs help, right? Let's get her the help. But oftentimes when they do the psychological evaluation, when these things are proven, when they're on paper, right? They have to be argued in court. And it comes up that there's sexual abuse that she's had that's been relived or whatever, the reports of what she's saying happened to their kids, and she's saying the father of the child abused the kid, is unbelievably detailed. Because we read them. We read them in the groups, right? Unbelievably detailed. Like it goes to it's not just that this is a bottle with some stickers for school lunches on. It's like, well, it was a chrome bottle, a little bit worn, maybe a few years old, and with a little chink right here. And every time he looked at it, there was a twinkle in his eye. Like the detailed reports are so screwed up, and then they detail what the alleged assault was in like this extremely graphic way, which will get me banned on every social media platform. And it's disgusting, man. And when you find out that these are unfounded, right? When it comes back in the psych evals that the kids were coached by a forensic psychologist, when this comes back, there's no consequence for the people that potentially could have coached them. Like that's insane, right? So these things should be studied to look at how false allegations are made. And the vice versa, for men who are attacking women, who are unjustly, they're exploiting the court system, but these things are not, right? And what is studied is abusive men, abusive women sometimes with extreme cases, drug addiction with men and women, alcoholism. You know, there are things that do have studies around them that have helped our court systems move forward. But if you want to get the exploitation and the pure tragedy that so many, well, in this case, men and women, but in our case, men most of the time feel, dude, like these things that are just, it's obvious to us when we've looked at it. It's like, oh, this is fake. Oh, but he's going to jail. Great. Like these need to be studied, and they're not. I don't know if that fully answered your question, Big C, but that was my rant.
Have you ever heard of Bill Eddy in high conflict personality theories?
Mm-mm. Enlighten me. I should look him up, apparently.
He was like a social worker, psychologist type. And then after getting into like trying to help people in these high conflict divorces, he ended up becoming a family law attorney. And then he retired from that, and now he has it's like a high conflict institute.
I see it. Yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of interesting. So he's kind of categorizes this high conflict personalities into these subsets, people with borderline personality disorders, narcissistic. And he actually, I think now he coaches like attorneys and law firms and even corporations on how to deal with these types of people and relationships. And so it just, to me, it's interesting, like, how do you deal with somebody who is, because what he says it's usually not, like you go into family court and the judge is like, this is a high conflict divorce. And what he says, he's like, usually it's not both parties. It's usually one party that's creating 90% of the conflict. And
right.
The other person is just reacting to it. And the other person oftentimes gets looked upon negatively because they're the one responding to the person creating the conflict.
Yeah.
And their response is the one that, gets the negative attention because, they're kind of an outraged, similar to kind of maybe in the parental alienation side of things where, the person getting alienated, maybe exhibiting, not the ideal behavior because they're in outrage of, what's happening. And so it's just really interesting to think, like, how do you, I'm sure we've all heard about the gray man and, all these types of things of how do you respond, how do you deal with people that are like this, just kind of take out the emotions and give them a little response.
Yeah.
But the question is, how do you overcome it when they have possession of your children or they're hijacking your life in some way? How do you kind of, not talking to them and giving them short responses doesn't change the fact that they're, manipulating your children or whatever,
Yeah. So this is something which, man, on the calls for the group, I talk about this a little bit more because it gets a little bit more direct. And within addiction, there's an idea of where you have to stop an addict. Okay, you've got to stop them, right? And this is why you have law and you have harsh consequences, and this can work. Not saying it's the only way. There's a lot of people who criticize it, but it's more acceptable in addiction. With personality disorders, I think the same thing. They have to be stopped. And so how do you stop somebody with a personality disorder? So you have to put jail in front of them. You have to put severe consequences, and they have to be realities. Because something with so first off, what you were saying with what you were basically articulating, Bill Eddy thinks is the same thing we see, right? Is that they get you to react. They exploit the courts by being hysterical. They up all the emotion. They create chaos. Any reaction you make is what you fail at. This is just like the game plan. And it's like nobody's been planning this. They're just so chaotic that this happens. Okay. So the biggest goal is to understand how all that's going to work. And in some people's cases, they're like in too deep, right? So you want to be straight as an arrow. I mean, you kind of know all of this. We've talked. Straight as an arrow. Follow the language of the courts. And then their chaos builds up. Now, if it gets too deep with things like protective orders and stuff, dude, I mean, you got to defend the protective order. You got to, like, if they get certain advantages, it really puts you against the back foot big time. Dude, they need help. So I think the best thing for somebody who's in an escalated state of NPD, okay, so you could have NPD or BPD or have some crazy personality disorder and be a functional human being. Like, you can get some sort of therapeutic calmness to it, manageability to it. But if you can't, you have to have consequence. And the consequence has to be big. The problem is that there's not a lot of enforcement of that. And so then it moves into, what is your strategy in court? Can you get something that is criminal? And that's separate, right? So family court's family court. You got to win, defend your case. But can there be other things that move into bigger cases, things that are going to have severe financial consequences? And these should be things they deserve. So you're not making this up. And here's the thing, with somebody who has a personality disorder, a lot of the times you were their enabler. So you were, for your relationship, you were covering up things for them. And that needs to stop. So it doesn't mean that you need to expose and put out, intentionally harm them, but you need to allow their life to have consequences. And could be hard in some people's cases, depending on where they're at. But they have to have those consequences, or else they won't stop. And then when it comes to the damage of your kids, when we're in custody battles, we see the damage of our kids like we can't see them. They're acting kind of weird, and again, I always kind of bring this up, but they're doing good in school, and, they're integrated in sports, and they're able to decide right and wrong. Well, a kid that's got to compartmentalize that much, and a kid that has that much confusion, they're going to be all sorts of problems, right? So even if they are excelling at everything and they're hitting all the boxes to where we can go like, we're good, that doesn't mean that they're not going to attract a dysfunctional person later. It doesn't mean they are, but it means their probability goes way up, and they've built an ecosystem to have that. Okay, so that's what's screwed up. And this is also why it's important to stop it. It's important to be wise and not stop it like how we have false accusations against us. Stopping it doesn't mean to take away the rights of another parent. Stopping it means doing whatever so that parent can get the quickest amount of help possible. And if we're off in that we're getting the most amount of help to clearly see if they are truly that dysfunctional. Okay. So it's tough, but there needs to be consequences in court. And so I always tell guys, like, look at whatever you can find to first defend yourself and overwhelmingly win, but so that they have consequences that will address their dysfunction. If you win and they don't, they still have ways where they could come in with their dysfunction. So one, like it's not diagnosed, or it might be something like there's no consequences set in place for things that they repetitiously do, then you're just going to be in court again. You're actually setting yourself up for somewhat of a loss and a continued dance, or a way for them to do it better than they've done it before. I hope that answered it to some degree.
I mean, I don't really know what the answer is, because it doesn't seem like the courts, it seems like they want to tippy-toe around these type of topics. They seem like they want to tippy-toe around them and not do anything and just say, oh, therapy, 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 but nothing's really changing.
Yeah. Dude, therapy, there needs to be therapy with with people that understand personality disorders. That's where there needs to be therapy, man. And an acknowledgement from them that they have a personality disorder. Otherwise, therapy is just a thing they waste time with, an hour a week or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's screwed up, man. Dudes, I'm gonna have to wrap this up because it's almost midnight. And I really appreciate you guys, you dudes who came in to get on the free call. I'm gonna do more of these. I don't know if I'm gonna do another one this week, and of course I want to, but like today, 5 hours of calls and a bunch of dad stuff, whatever. So we will do a live stream more than likely tomorrow. There might be a meeting at my house with the local guys. I got to decide which one I'm going to do. But there'll definitely be one on Tuesday, and we're going to dive into a lot with the personality disorder stuff. I guess I should look at the camera and no longer look at the Zoom. That's a tough thing. But so a lot of stuff. If you are looking for more like personal contact, look into my groups. If you're wanting to get on these calls or whatever on the free ones, you need to get on the email list. There's a ton of value to it. It's really, really good. And in November, we're going to be making it more open for all sorts of different stuff. It'll be a really, really awesome thing. And so I don't know, man, I want to put this stuff out there for you guys. And, I make my living off of these groups that you can sign up for and pay money for. And if you want to do it for free, there's options there for you too, which is just going to show you that in the groups, man, I work my fucking ass off for you getting what you want. Everything that we promote here is meant to work. Doesn't mean it'll work for you with custody. It's so crazy, but we try and find an answer. And we have absolutely examples of men who have been in some of the hardest shit and they've won. It's always hard. It's not easy. There's no quick fix to any of it, in any form of an entry point for a man with pain. Real pain is never a quick fix. It's not fixed with a mentality or a quick workout plan. Those things can be part of it. Very, very difficult. So that's that. Thank you guys so much. More than likely, we'll be back tomorrow night. And if you're on my email list, you'll be notified about it all. Thanks, guys. And thanks for the person who donated on YouTube. You're awesome. All right. Ciao, guys. Three gifters on TikTok. Restriction details. I made 3 cents on TikTok. I want to see these restriction details. What the hell is this? Anyway, YouTube, you guys have done me good. Man, I really appreciate the donation thing. You didn't have to do that. And we'll talk to you guys soon.